Now, just as you have to give your car an oil change and tune-up now and then for the best performance, so too you have to pay attention to the settings in Photoshop to make sure it runs like you want it to and to make the best use of your computer's resources. Let's take a look at this important aspect of using Photoshop. And the way you access the preferences is to come up to Edit on a PC, Photoshop on a Mac, click on it, the drop-down list will appear, and on here you'll find preferences. Now on a PC it's way at the bottom down here, so you come down and run your cursor over it, run to the top, and we'll start at the top and come down. Now on this particular general area, I just leave things pretty much the way they are. I don't do anything off of default. For the interface, this is where you can change the color. If you want to go back to the original color scheme of previous versions of Photoshop, you don't like the darker interface, then you can change that right here. There's also standards that you can change for the full screen mode and so on and so on. Now under options, this is stuff that is completely personal preference, so adjust these however you want to. Same thing down here. Under file handling, much the same thing. If you want to change it, be my guest, it's purely a matter of personal preference. Under performance, if I have more than 8 gigs of RAM, I'm going to run this slider up to 70%. I want Photoshop to use 70% of RAM if you have more than 8 gigs of RAM. And as we have mentioned in previous lessons, most Macs will accept 16 gigs of RAM, and virtually all PCs made in the last 2 years will accept 16 gigs of RAM. So make that adjustment if you have the proper amount of RAM installed. As for history and cache, the history states I have it jacked way up. And I do that because I do a lot of changes on images and I like to go back and experiment, so I have a lot of history states that I don't want to lose. So the default, I think, is somewhere around 2025, and I jacked it up to 61. Cache levels should be, well, as high as you think they ought to go. I mean, if you see a bottleneck in performance, then come back and adjust this setting. But I run it up to 8 because when I'm working on an individual image, the responses to the changes are a lot faster when you have those cache levels set at 8. The cache tile size should stay at 128. See down here where it says set cache levels to 2 or higher for optimum GPU performance. Now on the graphics processor settings, check the Use Graphics Processor box because that enables the Mercury graphics engine to work the way it's supposed to. Click on Advanced Settings, and under Drawing Mode, I set it on Advanced. And again, try it. If you have problems, then back it off to normal or basic, but start with Advanced and see if that doesn't give you the best performance. On my machines, it is absolutely making Photoshop sing and dance. You want to check Use Graphics Processor to accelerate computation. Anti-alias guides and paths should be checked, and also 30-bit display. OpenGL, we had a long discussion about that in a previous lesson. I would say unless you're doing a lot of 3D or CAD work, do not enable the OpenGL. It's more of a pain than it's worth. So there you have the performance settings, and then cursors is strictly a matter of personal preference, whatever you want. Transparency and gamut, the same thing. Units and rulers, this is where you come when you want to change the settings on the crop tool. When you click on the crop tool, and it's not letting me do it because I have this preferences panel up, well, let's just do it. You click on the crop tool, you have the ability to preset either a pixel setting or an inches setting. Centimeters, depending. In other words, if you want the setting to be 600 pixels by 800 pixels, then what you need to do is come to Edit, Preferences, Units and Rulers, change inches to pixels, and then back to inches, if that's what, in other words, if you're sizing for a print, you would use inches. If you're sizing for the internet, obviously, you would set rulers to pixels. Now for guides, grid, and slices, I leave this just the way it came down default. Plugins, same thing. For type, which is text, of course, I leave this with default settings. And of course, on 3D, I never do any 3D, so I'm not the guy to talk to about how to set things up for 3D. But here are your settings for 3D if that's something that you do a lot of. So there you have the settings for Photoshop that will enable you to get the most out of it for the best possible results on your adjustments.